Portia City Expats Club is a non-profit social organisation and our speakers are volunteers. The club as such assumes no responsibility or liability for the professional reputation of or the quality of services provided by the speaker today.
And I just checked all his fingers to make sure that he wasn't the one that pressed the nuclear button, but he said no, he wasn't one of those people. So I'd like you to give a warm welcome to Joseph, the Submariner.
Thank you for coming out today. Okay, so I want to give a quick bio as far as how I got to this point. I was born and raised in a small town in southern Indiana, about 10,000 people. Pretty average middle-class life. I got to going into my senior year in high school. My father takes me aside and has a little talk with me. He says, "Okay, Joe, you need to decide what you..." He said, "You can go to college, I'll help you," but I was really burned out on school, and I knew I would just party and fail out, and that wouldn't end well. So I was like, well, what else? Full-time jobs, and in my town it was mostly woodworking factories, so they build furniture and panels and organs and things. That didn't seem very appealing. So my buddy, I was bitching to my buddy, and he's like, "Well, let's join the Marines, Dad," or, you know, Joe. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that sounds cool." You know, he was 17. So I told my dad, and he's like, "Okay, well, we'll go down and talk to him." It turns out my buddy had a criminal record, a felony conviction, so he couldn't join the military. So that kind of derailed that idea. So my father's like, "Well, let's go down and talk to the recruiters. You know, they're all in one place." So the Marine guy was out that day, and he's like, "Well, let's go talk to the Navy recruiter." And I'm like, "Okay, Dad, I'll humor you." And went in there, and it's like, "Oh, wow, that's kind of cool," you know. So here I am. So that's how I joined the Navy. So here we go. Okay, so why submarines? I get that question all the time, so I'll give you the test that they give us. So how many of you would be the submariners like me? Okay, so the first step in this journey after basic training, or boot camp as they call it in the Navy, is submarine school. And it's only 6 weeks. It's in Groton, Connecticut, for those of you who know that area. It's only 6 weeks because it's really a screening tool before the Navy spends all this money on you. They want to make sure you're not claustrophobic. They make sure you're not what's called a conscientious objector. You can launch the nuclear weapons if you had to. So they screen us, and those people that don't meet that screening, they get rid of you early, so they don't have to spend a lot of money on you. And I am right there. So after submarine school, after you successfully complete that in the Navy, if you go on, there's an A school, which is a general where there's multiple rates that go in there, and I went to electronics troubleshooting school. That was my A school. And then C school is the very specialized school, and that's where all the same job rate that you really learn your job. And it's a little over a year. It was quite a bit of school. I had to enlist for 6 years, where most people enlisted for 4 years, because all the school, the Navy wants to get their money back out of you. So, and I am right there. Okay, so my submarine. In June 22nd of 1963, 3 submarines, nuclear ballistic missile submarines, were launched. We had the Calhoun, John C. Calhoun, the Daniel Boone, and this is mine, the USS Tecumseh. So way back in '63. This is a picture of the USS Tecumseh transiting the Panama Canal, May 29, 1964. Now, I'm not in this picture. I wasn't even born yet. So something to notice about this is whenever we're not in dock, we're actually, you know, going out out at sea or in like this, everybody that goes topside has to wear a life preserver, and there's a little groove here, has a tether that you're connected to, so that way, of course, if you fell over, you're not going to get chopped up in the propeller, and, you know, they can retrieve you easily. So that's for safety. So I get a lot of questions over the years about physical characteristics of the submarine, and all these will pertain to the submarine I was on, the USS Tecumseh, because there's different classes and different types. This is the one, obviously, that I'm familiar with. So SSBN actually has a meaning in Navy language, and the SS is for submersible ship. And the B means ballistic missiles, and the N indicates it's nuclear powered. So, and then the whole number is just a unique number assigned to each submarine, each ship, every vessel. So even though we use the word ship, when I first got to the submarine force, an older man, well, my age now, they've been in like 20 years, he's like, we don't call submarine ships. Ships float on the surface. We call them boats, yet aim is submersible ship. But hey, you know, I can't argue because I'm just, you know, the junior guy there, right? You know, so they would give you hell if you called it a ship in that community. You don't call it a ship. Holding it down. All right. So where did the name Tecumseh come from? In the American Indian tribes, the Shawnee people, he was a prominent leader during the 18th and 19th centuries, and so it was named in honor of him. So every submarine has like the beginning, think of it like a prototype, the first one of its type, and then every one after that that's created is called that class. So the USS Lafayette was the first one in this style, this class of submarine. And several were made in the Lafayette class before we switched to the Ohio class, which is the current one in operation. It was decommissioned on July 23rd, 1993. I got out of the Navy in early 92, so it was shortly after I got out of the Navy. It was decommissioned. So more physical characteristics, 130 meters long. I get that question a lot. 10 meters wide, and the draft is 9.55 meters. For those that aren't familiar with the Navy terminology, draft is from the waterline to the bottom of the ship. And of course, that's important if you're the captain or the navigator, because you got to make sure the water's deep enough so you don't run aground. So speed is measured in knots in the U.S. Navy, and a knot is, not everybody knows the definition. It's 1 nautical mile per hour. A nautical mile is different than a land mile, slightly. As you can see there, it's 1.15 land miles, 6,080 feet, or 1.85 kilometers. So that's how we measure speed on naval vessels. And the top speed, flank speed is the term used, in surface is about 16 knots an hour or 30 kilometers per hour. Submerged is faster, 21 knots an hour or 39 kilometers per hour. And a question I got a lot, and the first time I didn't know why, is why would you be able to go so much faster submerged? You'd think that on the surface you would be able to go faster, right? So I had to look this up because I didn't know it. And, you know, the surface ships have that V-hole which cuts the waves and makes it very hydrodynamically efficient as it's going through the water. Well, a submarine, of course, is rounded because it's designed to be underwater, and you don't want that V. Well, when you run on the surface, the submarine, the power has to lift the water, all that seawater up every time it goes through. And that energy expended is actually enough to slow it down considerably on the surface. And that's why. So the crew, about 140 men, plus or minus 4 or 5, depending on what happens and what the operational things are. During my time, it was all men. There were no women allowed on submarines. That's recently changing slowly. There are some submarines that have some female officers. And the reason is the officers have a much better life than us low-life enlisted did. We had, you know, stacks of bunks and showers we had to share and all that. Well, the officers have staterooms and they have their own room and they have their own shower area. It's very, yeah, much better quality of life for an officer on board. But logistically, having a female officer, she could have her own stateroom, where it would be impractical to have a female enlisted, because there's no way to make separate facilities to keep privacy and appropriateness. So, but that's not for me to work out. That's way above my pay grade. No windows. I get that question a lot. So, yeah, you don't know where the hell you are. It's just somewhere in the ocean. No windows. Okay, so this is the Lafayette, SSBN 616, and that was the first one in that series. So my submarine was functionally identical. So starting from the aft part, the rear part, this is the engine room. And of course, this is where your crankshaft, your diesel generator, the desalinators to make fresh water, just some of the other equipment's in there. Then you have the reactor, the nuclear reactor. And these guys take care of this. That's why it's close together. And here we have various machinery rooms. You have like the atmosphere on a submarine has to be carefully controlled, because you think of 140 men breathing, that's a lot of oxygen that's used and a lot of carbon dioxide that's generated. And we don't want to go to the surface a lot, because that's the potential for giving away our position, which is dangerous and defeats the whole purpose of us being a stealth platform to launch missiles from in the event of World War III. So there were CO2 scrubbers that used a chemical called amine that combines with the CO2 and took it out of the atmosphere. Well, you have to have oxygen too, and there were also oxygen generators in these machinery rooms here that would do that. And we did surface to, we called it a snorkel mast, and it basically just stuck a little pipe above the waves, and it was all black, so we do it at night. And we would take fresh air in and recirculate the air. We did that probably every 3 or 4 days we'd do that. But it's not fully surfacing, it's just sticking a pipe up above the waves at night. So it was very, very low risk. So forward to that is the missile compartment. That's pretty self-explanatory. And on my submarine there were 16 missile tubes. The current Ohio class has 24. But we had 16. This is where I worked. It's the Missile Control Center. And then this was the mess deck where we ate, the enlisted did. And up here underneath this is where the periscope would be. This is the control center. And then there's navigation and radio and sonar in these areas here. And then this is the berthing areas, the sleeping areas, and the toilets and the showers and whatnot. And all the way forward here is the torpedo room, and I'm going to show you a picture of that later, but that of course is where if it became necessary for self-defense, we're not an offensive submarine. This is a part of what Tom talked about, the triad, about the bombers that he flew and the silo missiles and then the submarines. It was a triad as far as deterrent for the Soviets to not do a first strike, because we would annihilate them back. And it was actually called MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. Very appropriate acronym, right? So, any questions about that? So in the Navy, your job is called your rate for enlisted. And it's just your job. It's a code. And mine was fire control technician ballistic, because there were fire control technicians for other surface ships and things, so they had to designate ballistic missiles. And they called us FTBs. Now, because one of the aspects of this job as an FTB, we had access to the uber top secret information about where the nuclear bombs were targeted. And that required a top secret security clearance. Not only top secret, but they had a classification ESI back at the time, extremely sensitive information, which was above just regular top secret. It was so high. And I had to have that clearance, even though I was just 18 years old, because I had access to that information, and they had to, do this thorough background check. They actually sent 2 FBI agents to my hometown. I'm 18 years old, and they're asking my friends and my teachers, "Hey, what about Joe? What is he a good guy?" Like, thank God they all lied for me, and I got in anyway. So, and like I said earlier, I spent about a year and a half in school, so it was a more advanced field. That's why I had to enlist for 6 years instead of 4 years. So what did I do? So I learned in that year and a half all about electronics, the different components, how to troubleshoot using, back then we used oscilloscopes and multimeters and all kinds of different diagnostic equipment. If something, we'd run preventive maintenance checks on the missile fire control systems on regular intervals, and if we found a problem, then we would go through our procedures and troubleshoot and fix the problem. So that's basically what I learned, and also to participate in the countdown to launch the missiles should that ever become necessary. We did drills regularly about countdowns to actually launch the missile, but we didn't actually initiate all the fire control that would actually, there could be a risk. It was all practice. Carry out retargeting orders from COMSUBLANT. COMSUBLANT is an acronym used in the Navy. It stands for Commander Submarine Atlantic Force. So if the president ordered a strike and then it goes down through the chain, it eventually gets to COMSUBLANT, and the COMSUBLANT sends us a radio message, which has to be decoded and authenticated by the radioman and the captain and the XO, and they all agree. You might have seen Crimson Tide, where there was some, the gist of the story was there was, uncertainty whether it was an authentic message, and it was a nuclear launch, so we had to be sure, and then the captain, the XO guy. So that all has to be agreed upon that, yes, this is real, and then the rest of the process is carried out. And I'll describe that in detail a little bit farther here. So retargeting orders, way above my pay grade, but sometimes we'd be out there and they're like, oh, missile 16 needs to change to these targets. That's way above my pay grade. But we had to program the missiles, the guidance systems to do that. And that's, the books were so top secret that when we took them out of the safe, anybody in the room had to sign their name and date and time. So that way, I guess if there was ever a breach of confidentiality in that information, they have a list, the first list of who to go for to investigate. So. My first patrol, when we go out underwater on a mission, we call it a patrol. And it's typically 72 days, can be plus or minus 4 or 5 days. So I get to the submarine, and I'm junior man, and I'm excited. I'm going to learn my job and everything and go have fun. And they're like, oh, Petty Officer Cheser, you are the junior person, and we're overmanned in our FTB section. I was like, okay. Well, they're short. They had a guy got sick in the submarine, or the sonar shack, so you're going to work in sonar. I'm like, what? I don't know. I didn't go to school for sonar. Well, that's how the military works. They don't give a crap. Wherever you're needed, you go. You figure it out. So I was like, well, crap. Okay, so I spent my first 72 days underwater in a patrol in sonar, some job that I'd never been trained for. So they basically sat me down in front of a screen like this, and these lines are normally like pretty straight. And if it did something like this, they're like, just let us know. Just watch the screen for 8 hours and then, tell us if something moves. Yeah, very boring most of the time. One cool part I did learn is snapping shrimp and whales. So I got to listen to lots of weird underwater sounds, because we have hydrophones around the submarine to listen for enemy craft and surface ships. And these snapping shrimp are so noisy. Their pinchers snap together. They make a small air bubble that implodes. And by themselves, they're tiny. But when you have millions of them doing that at once, it's noisy under there. Really noisy. We were usually in the North Atlantic because of the range of the missiles. So that was like constant. You'd hear that sound like that. It was crazy. And whale songs, they're low frequency, and in the water they can travel 5,000 to 8,000 miles underwater. So we would constantly hear whale songs. It was pretty wild to hear. I mean, that's, 18 years old from the Midwest, I'd never heard anything like this. That was really cool. That part was pretty interesting and exciting. It was just watching that damn screen for 6 to 8 hours is just boring as hell. The lines, it's a graphical representation of sound from the hydrophones. So if there's no sound, it's basically a pretty much straight line. But if you get it's scrolled down like a waterfall. They actually called it the waterfall display. It would scroll down. This would be the new information coming down, this old information. That way they could have a chance to, oh, what's that, And these guys were experienced, so they could, if we saw a surface ship, they could actually listen for a short period of time and tell you it's a 6-bladed prop doing 88 RPM. I mean, it was amazing, the skill level of these guys that had been doing this for a while. And then they would tell the commander or the captain of the ship, so they could respond appropriately if we had to change course to avoid them, or we never came across an enemy submarine. That would be the biggest nightmare, of course, is a hunter-killer sub from the Soviets coming at us. That never happened when I was out there, so fortunately. Yeah, that's true. This was especially true for me being on a ballistic missile submarine, because most countries don't want nukes in their country, okay? A lot of European countries and stuff, and so they would ask the U.S. Navy, okay, do you have nukes on board? And the official line from the U.S. Navy was, we can neither confirm nor deny that. So they said, okay, if you're not going to tell us, then you're not going to pull in. So, yeah, so we didn't get many port calls. One time, it was a NATO port in Lisbon, Portugal. We were able to pull in for a few days and got to explore Lisbon, Portugal, so that was pretty cool. But that was it, my whole time. Okay, so this is a huge part of submarine life. We call it, these are supposed to be dolphins. That's what the designer, I guess, made it, and then the submarine in the middle going through the waves. So this is like an elite club you belong to or you don't belong to, and you're like a low life. They said lower than whale shit on the bottom of the ocean is what they used to tell us, until you get this. And this is not easy to get. It's one of the hardest damn things I ever did in my life. And to get this, you have we call it a qualification book, and you had lines, and you had to have certain people sign off that you had a deep level of knowledge. And I'm talking a deep level of knowledge on these subjects, like ventilation system of the submarine. You go to get that checkout, the first thing they told me is draw it. Every fan number, and how's this fan work? Is it hydraulic? Is it, you had to know everything. And that was just one signature. So this is a very, very challenging and difficult thing to achieve. They give you 2 years. I worked really, really hard, and I did it in about 1 year and 3 months. And it's like you were treated as a second-class citizen until you get this on the submarine force. So it's a big, big deal. The only difference between why this one's silver, this is for enlisted, and this is for officers, the gold one. So that's me getting the dolphins, the submarine warfare insignia, pinned on by the captain of the Tecumseh at the time. Very proud moment. And you'll notice I have a pretty low ranking. I'm a third-class petty officer. June of '88. We wore these. We called them poopy suits. They're just like one-piece overalls with a zipper, and we could only wear them underway. We could never wear them in port, so where civilians might see us. But underway, we would wear these, and they were extremely practical because in an emergency fire or something like that, or a launch, you could get out of your rack and get that on in just seconds and zip it up and go. Very, very easy. So it was very practical. This is a dosimeter because we had nuclear radiation. We had to have something to keep track, and then we'd send it in at the end, and they would Somebody in some lab would analyze it to make sure we didn't get too much ionizing radiation exposure. At least they never told me. Okay, so damage control training. Big surface ships have specialized personnel that's all they do is damage control. That they're firefighters, they're flood control experts. Well, you don't have, with 140 men with other jobs, you don't have the space to have specialized people like that. So everybody on a submarine, everybody, from the captain on down to the lowest man, had to be trained on how to fight fires and control flooding. And so in the off crew, they had a building that was a simulated submarine engine room with the water pipes, and they could stand at a console and push buttons and create these big flooding scenarios where we had to go in there and use the equipment to stop the flooding. And I went to firefighting school twice too, but it was really fun because you're just getting blasted by high pressure water, but you still do it. And by the time you finish, the water's almost up to your neck. But it was fun. Enjoyed it. We did it every off crew because you had to be very, very proficient, because a fire or flooding on a submarine, of course, is much, much more severe than on a surface ship, because you can die real quickly in that kind of scenario. So you had to get everything under control. Everybody had to know. So some extra duties. I hated field day. We called it field day. I have no idea where that term comes from, but basically for 4 hours, unless you're a higher ranking person, you had to get on your hands and knees and scrub the wax off the floor every week and put new wax down and scrub every crevice and cranny and everything. It's just, it didn't matter. You had to be busy for 4 hours to clean. And it just, I hated field day. So everybody had to participate in shipwide drills, fire, flooding, nuclear launch. Everybody had a station, a job to do. So it doesn't matter if you were on your off time. There was no off time. You're sleeping, that alarm goes up, you gotta get up. You gotta go do your part, wherever your station is. So that was a big deal. And when you're working on that Dolphins, you had to do your work, and you had to stay in your space for 6 hours, and then you had to do that in your off time. So I barely got any sleep for that first year because I was just drills and working and working on my Dolphins, qualification. It was brutal. Lots of coffee. Something interesting is, because we're underwater and the amount of personnel we had 18-hour days. So there was artificial day and night, essentially. And this was done for practical reasons, like I said, because it was 3 6-hour watches was much more doable than having the shorter but more frequent watches. So we had 3 sections, 6 hours each. So night and day were 8 hours, one day. December 30, 88, this is actually when we were in Lisbon, Portugal. That's why I was in the work uniform here, because we were in port. As you can see now, I have my Dolphins, iron-on patch for the working uniform, and I now have another stripe. I'm a second-class petty officer. Now, a little hard to see, but behind me here is, you see the row, it's a little fuzzy, but there's 16 lit buttons there that light up in different colors, and they're one for each missile. And during the countdown, the person sitting here has the most challenging job of my grade. The MCC supervisor would have to go through and make sure, spin up missile 1, spin up missile 2, go down the list, and it's a process to make sure everything's working. And if it's red, there's a problem, you got to figure out what, we train on what to do if there's a problem, if it turns red in this particular step. So we trained a lot on this to be able to do this. And it was usually the more senior folks that did the supervisor job, but one time they decided to mess with me and say, okay, Joe, you sit down and be the supervisor. I'm like, oh shit. And it was stressful. It was very stressful. I did okay, but God, I was stressed, because it's very intense. Things are happening very, very fast. You got to keep track of a lot of things. I kind of think of like a pilot, when you're first doing it, you're like, it's overwhelming, but then you get used to it. The last thing I want to do is there's a safe combination, a rotary dial here, and there's a trigger. Behind that is the actual nuclear firing trigger, and the weapons officer would be the one that actually completes the circuit at the very end and fires the missile after everything's been approved and everything else is done. So I'll go over that. But yeah, it's behind that safe here. There's a practice one for the drills right here. Me and my fellow FTBs in Missile Control Center. Yeah, we always consider ourselves the most elite sailors in the Navy, so. Less than 1%, they said. Okay, this fascinates a lot of people. You've probably seen it on some videos or movies, submarine movies. Emergency blow. So what is emergency blow? Well, suppose you're cruising at 400 feet and something catastrophic happens. Fire, flooding. Well, you want to get the hell to the surface as quickly as possible. You know, you don't want to just drive up there at a leisurely pace. So they have this mechanism in place. The ballast tanks are adjusted. They have compressed air, and they can make the submarine heavier if you want to go down, or lighter as you go up. Well, that's done to like stabilize when you want to like cruise at 150 feet or 400 feet or whatever. But if you have an emergency, there were these chicken switches, we call them, in the control room, and you pull these down and it just dumps all the compressed air into the ballast tanks, making it immediately buoyant as possible. And boy, it does. It comes up at a steep angle, about 30, 40 degrees. And I got to experience this once. It was really cool, but you're hanging on. You know, you're not like standing here. You're having to hang on to something so you don't go flying down the passageway, because you're like 30, 40 degree angle. It's real. It's fun. And then you come up and you're like, you know, really cool. But that's why it exists. Questions about that? Okay, so submarines, there's SSN. You notice it's missing the B because there's no ballistic missiles. In U.S. Navy parlance, the ones with the missiles, the SSBNs, we call them boomers. And the best information I could find about where that term came from was it makes a loud boom when the nuclear bomb goes off. So they call them boomers. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's the best information I could find. So the SSNs have a completely different mission. They are the ones that hunt at the time, the Soviet boomers, the Soviet SSBNs, to try to take them out in the event of a nuclear war before they could launch against America. So in U.S. Navy parlance, it's called fast attack. So there's boomers and fast attack subs. And that was not the kind I was on, but some people get confused sometimes about the two types. Very, very different missions. Very different missions. So I want to talk briefly about this. These are the 16 missile tubes, and in this particular one, the hatches are open. Now, there is a fiberglass dome over here. So when we open these hatches underwater for a launch, obviously if you didn't have something, all the seawater would flood in and ruin the missile. That's no good. So there's a fiberglass dome here. And that's important to remember. When I get to the launch sequence, I'll discuss why there's that fiberglass and how it gets out of the way. But the first step when we're getting ready to launch would be to open the missile hatch, of course. Okay, so the missile launch. I get a lot of questions about this. So what happens? Okay, radio receives the message from command and control, the president, on down. The radioman and the XO and the captain get together and they go through their secret codes, they break open the seals and their safes, and they compare and they say, okay, this is authentic, it's a real launch. At that point, the captain has in his safe a captain's key for the control. It's part of the circuit. It won't work without him turning the key. The executive officer, the XO, has 16 missile keys that he has to go to the missile house, the missile compartment, and each missile has a key that has to be turned on. So that's 2. The final third one in the circuit is the weapons officer's key, and they're all in isolated different areas, different people, and obviously the reason for that is you don't want a rogue 1 or 2 people launching. without authorization, starting World War III. So that's why they were separate compartments, separate keys, separate people. 3 different ones to make this all happen. Okay, so this has happened. All the keys are in place. We're down there in the Missile Control Center. We're going to launch. When the weapons officer completes the circuit, he says, fire 1, okay? That completes the circuit. What happens, back in the missile house, each missile, there is a steel tank with 44 gallons of water, and it's got a small rocket motor on it. And that ignites the rocket motor. It's a small rocket motor. And that instantly vaporizes that 44 gallons of water into steam. The steam goes under the missile and lifts it off its support ring. That causes another cascade of actions. One is nitrogen tanks flood into the tank, or into the tube. That dome I was telling you about, well, it has to get out of the way, of course. So the way they do this is they use a product called detonating cord. And it burns at a, like, 24,000 kilometers per second. It's a ridiculous rate. And what it does is it segments it into like a pizza pie. So that it just kind of gets out of the way as the missile goes up. So the nitrogen pushes the missile up, and it keeps it dry, because the water would screw up the navigation. So as the missile goes up, when the guidance system signals it going down, that's when the first stage kicks in and it takes off. And I got a video up next, and it's going to show you. Watch for that. You'll notice when the missile is ejected, comes out of the seawater, there's no flames, there's no first stage ignition, because you don't want to fry your submarine, of course. So, and you want to make sure it's out of the water. So I have that on the video. So now that I want you to watch for that. How do you get it to play? See, there's no fire, and then the fire. After it starts sensing it's going down, the inertia. That's a Trident, but the physical process is the same as the Poseidon missiles that I had on my submarine. So some other things about this that I get questions a lot. Are there any self-destruct or abort, or can we recall them? The answer is no. Once it's gone, it's gone. There is no do-over, no abort, no self-destruct. And my theory is the reason for that is you don't want somebody getting cold feet at the last minute. And you know, if you've gone that far, it's over. You don't want somebody chickening out. So it's gone, it's gone. Another interesting thing about the missiles is the missiles that I had had MIRV, multiple independent retargeted vehicles. And what this means is in the top part, the payload that goes into subspace, eventually with the first and second stage, there were either 10 or 16 warheads that could be dropped on different targets from each missile. So, and on my submarine there were 10 per missile. So that's 160 just on my submarine if we get all 16 missiles off. 160 targets. In different targets we could hit with 16 missiles. And this ring in subspace will like drop target 1, move over some thrusters and drop target 2, drop target 3, drop target 4 until all 10, up to 10 were detonated. Some other interesting facts. It was discovered a long time ago, this is what I was taught, that an air burst is more destructive than a ground burst. It's physics, above my level, but this is what I was told. So they would typically detonate at about a 1 mile air burst and to get the maximum destructive effect. So there were 16 missiles. Any questions about the missiles? Yeah. So when we actually got the message, like, because we did a lot of drills, it would take about 15 minutes to be ready to launch number 1, and then a couple minutes between, to spin up the next one. Now, I'm not really sure the physics on that. I guess it might depend on the range too, because Soviet Union is a big, big place too. So if you're going to Vladivostok versus Moscow, you know, I'm not sure. Any other questions about the missiles? Yes. So the warheads, sometimes they would offload missiles when we were in port to change them out, maybe to test them after a certain period of time, I assume, to make sure they're functional and working. But they're sealed in a compartment, so there's not much maintenance to do on a warhead. The target? Well, the target is so all the coordinates for the targets were pre-programmed before launch. Yeah, so that's what we did, and sometimes they would change those mid-patrol, and that's what those retargeting events would be. It didn't happen often. Once, maybe twice, sometimes never. I did 4 patrols, and yeah, they're not very often, but it does happen occasionally. Yeah.
So with the multiple warheads, what was the average, like the distance between each target, roughly? Do you know what that was? Or like what was their range? So you got one dropping in another location. What was the range capacity? So.
Right. So it's like 3,000 to 4,000 miles, I think, was the range roughly. So we were always in the North Atlantic, and like Ireland, UK, off there in the North Atlantic, because of the range limitations, and the Soviet Union is so big. The newer missiles can sit in the United States and still launch and make it, but we didn't have that capability. We had to go to the North Atlantic. So. Torpedoes. Now, for an SSBN, this is a defense. This is like a last, oh crap, we got a 100 killer sub on our tail. We may have to try to take them out. Good luck, but it's better try than not try. So these torpedoes that we had were Mark 48 Mod 2 back when I was in. They're like Mod 7 now, and they've improved the technology, but they're still look the same. You can see the length. It's about 5 meters, 53 centimeters wide. Pretty heavy, 1,558 kilograms. So normally these torpedoes were like here, just stored in the racks inside the submarine, not in the tubes. They would only be put in the tubes if the captain said load tube 1, load tube 2, load 2, whatever. And then the torpedo men have winches and things that are designed to move that into the torpedo tube. So some interesting facts about these torpedoes. They have active and passive sonar options. So active sonar is what you guys have all heard on the Navy's warfare movies, the ping, and they're listening for the return signal, and then they can figure out the distance from the target. So that's active sonar. We never, 99.99% an SSBN does not use active sonar because that immediately gives away our position. So that would be extraordinarily rare event for us to use active sonar. Passive sonar is just listening, like I did for those 6 hours at a time, just listening. So they can do either. It can be programmed. When they're shot out of the tube, of course, you have a firing solution, they call it, where basically, your algebra class from high school, where this ship's going this direction at this speed, and you're going at this speed. When you're going to meet? So you have to do that algebra. And of course, the ship is going to take evasive action. Who wouldn't, right? I mean, so it's going to change. And World War II, you couldn't change anything. It just you hope for the best. But these guys, they can. they have a wire like 30,000 feet, 10,000 meters, and you can actually program, oh, the ship, went starboard, 20 degrees. We can move the torpedo 20 degrees. It's pretty fascinating. So it's really advanced compared to like World War II, where you see the movie where they just shoot and forget, basically. You have that option. You can cut the wire and shoot and forget if you want to do evasive action, but it's a nice feature to have that you can wire guide it to the target. Makes it a lot harder for them to evade. There are countermeasures. We had them too. I was told it's like big Alka-Seltzer tablets that would shoot out the back and then make a bunch of noise that would hopefully confuse the torpedo. So who knows if it worked, and we never had to use them. But, any questions about torpedoes? Okay. Oh.
You've launched the torpedo for whatever reason, shall we say, and does that mean there's that physical cable between the torpedo going forward and the submarine back here?
A physical?
Is it a physical cable or is it a radio type signals?
It's a wire, an actual physical cable, yeah. Yep. Definitely true. We're a proud bunch. Swim call. All right, so this happened. I got to do this once during my 2 years, four times on the submarine. We pulled into Nassau, Bahamas, and we were supposed to get a port call, but of course the country of Bahamas didn't want us coming in, so they said, okay, you can anchor out a couple miles and then take the small boat and ferry your sailors back and forth so they can go have some fun, on the island. We were happy, really happy. Well, the waves were too big for the small boat. So we sat there for 3 days and could see the damn island, but never got to go. So the captain wanted to give us something, I guess, as a consolation prize, and he gave us a swim call. So I got to go swimming in 2 miles off of Nassau. It was fun, but it would have been better to go see Nassau. But these are called sail planes. It's part of the navigation underwater, and it's probably like 10 to 12 meters up, so it's not an insignificant drop. But it was fun, and we got to jump up there and then climb up there. Now you notice this gentleman here has a weapon here, and it was M14s that we had at the time, and we had that too. He's shark watch. So his job, usually we pick one of the best sharpshooters on the submarine, the most skilled, and his job was to watch for sharks while we were out swimming. So hopefully we didn't see any when I was there, but you take precautions. It's fun. It's also called steel beach. That's a term used in the Navy. When you go swimming, is steel beach. Yeah. So, of course, we generate trash, solid waste, okay? So to get rid of the solid waste, we had this high-end trash compactor called the trash disposal unit. And you had a metal cage and you had metal weights in the bottom, and then you'd smash the solid waste down there and then seal it up. And then they would close this top hatch and then open the bottom hatch, and boom, it goes to the seafloor for how many hundreds of years, who knows. But that's how we got rid of our solid waste. And it was a dirty job, and I'm glad I never had to do it. Nasty. So the toilets. Toilets are definitely something unless you've ever actually seen this or used it, it's different. Stainless steel bowl with a plastic thing here, and then this is a seawater valve. This long handle is how we flush. So it's gravity, so you do your business, you pull the handle, and when you pull that handle, there's a ball valve, and it has a hole through it. So normally, in the up position like that, it's blocked. The water stays, okay, for the next person. And when you do your business and you pull it, it opens up a hole, and gravity drops it into the waste collecting tank. And that's how the toilets work, gravity. And then you close it up again, and then you turn this on to fill it up with water for the next guy. And that's how it works. primitive, but it works. And it's important to remember that for one of the stories coming up. Oh, it's exciting. If I can sell tickets to that. Okay, sea stories. Yeah, sound-powered phone batteries. Okay, so you see that this actually existed. I don't know if it still does, but it did. And this whole apparatus here is all sound-powered. There is no batteries or physical power source other than your voice. And we had a system of cables wired throughout the submarine. You twist it and plug it in, and you could talk across the length of the submarine. And the reason they're sound-powered and not electrical-powered is, what if there's a fire? What if there's a casualty? What if you lose power? Well, you don't want to lose communication. So it was really smart, I mean, to have this. So we use these a lot during our countdowns and stuff. And the new guys, because it gets really boring. Once you get your dolphins, you get qualified, you get really bored. So one of the pastimes is to mess with the new people, the new kids. And this is one way we do it. Like, hey, you know, go to Supply and give me some sound-powered phone batteries. Well, of course, everybody on the submarine plays along, right? And they come back and they're like, oh, they said they were out, or, you know, oh, they said they're going to order some. Like, okay. You know, then we tell them, and then we'd all laugh. Okay, this is another game we used to play on the newbies. To exercise the torpedo tubes, there's an actuator arm that, you know, you have to flood it with seawater to actually shoot the torpedo out, okay? Well, obviously we don't want to waste a $1 million torpedo just doing an exercise, so they would go through what they call shooting a water slug. They would flood the tube just like there's a torpedo in there, go through all the motions so they know what to do, and then boom, you'd hear the actuator push the water out just like as if a torpedo was in there. But nothing was in there, of course, except water. Well, I happened to be up on the control area one time, and I saw this happened, and they sent the new guy down to get the serial number of the water slug. So, of course, yes, sir, he goes down there to the torpedo room. And torpedo men are terrible pranksters. And he comes back, and, sir, the serial slug is 12568. And, you know, and we're all like, you know, we're snickering over there, and thank you, Seaman. You know, but yeah, it was fun. It only worked once, but yeah, there's new guys coming all the time. Navy showers. So this is one of the first things you're taught, that potable water or fresh water, drinkable water, is precious on a submarine because it requires an immense amount of energy to distill in the big distilling plants back in the engine room. So we got to be mindful and conservative of fresh water, especially you have 140 men taking showers and whatnot, cooking. And so they tell you, you get wet, you turn the water off, you lather up, rinse off, and then you turn the water off and you dry off. That's a Navy shower. Okay? We're taught that from day one, pretty much. Well, there's always somebody. There was this young man that decided, I don't need to do that. And he took a nice home shower, warm shower. And the term in the Navy, U.S. Navy, is called taking a Hollywood shower. And he got caught taking a long Hollywood shower. So the punishment was he had to go back on his off time into the engine room where the desalination plants, when they make the water, and sit there with a chair on his off time for 8 hours watching it make the water that he used. And the engine room is it's hot, it's loud, it's just a nasty place to be. You don't want to, and so that's very unpleasant to sit there for 8 hours in a chair. Very hot, very hot. So yeah, he didn't do it again. And everybody's favorite story, okay. The Golden Flapper Award. So remember I told you how this toilets work. It's pressure, the gravity feeds it into the waste collecting tank. Well, eventually the waste collecting tank fills up. And it has to be emptied. And the way we emptied it was, we would, on the hull of the submarine, there's a valve, seawater valve that opens it up, the waste collecting tank, to sea. But of course the pressure would just push it in. So we have to pressurize it with air to 700 pounds per square inch. That's a lot of pressure. And then the sea valve is open and it blows all that wastewater out to the ocean. Okay? Well, when you're doing that, these toilets are bubbling air because there's so much pressure in there. And you don't want to open them because, well, it's going to take the path of least resistance. And they hang signs. They're really good. The people that did this, they hang signs, red signs. Don't use the toilets. We're blowing the tanks, right? So one night, I was going into the missile compartment. It was late at night, and I don't remember what I was doing, but I was going from the forward compartment to the missile compartment. And there's one toilet in the missile compartment. Most are in the forward area. And I go through the hatch, and it looks like smoke in the air. And of course, you know, for a submariner underwater, that's like a immediate, you know, your sphincter slams shut, like, oh my God. And so that brief moment of panic goes away and your training kicks in. And then I was like, oh my God, if this is a fire, I need to, you know, find out and pull the alarm and wake everybody up so we can survive this. So I go sprinting down the passageway to try to find out what the hell is going on. And I get to the one toilet there, and this poor sailor is standing there like, he had opened the valve, and it is like literally Old Faithful geyser of wastewater. Disgusting. So he was in literally a state of shock. And I'm like, let me go get the doctor. Because you got to get all kinds of shots and antibiotics and stuff, because it goes in every orifice and mucous membrane in your body when that comes out at 700 psi. So that's called the Golden Flapper Award. And it only happened once when I was out at sea, because, you know, yeah, you don't do that twice for sure after going through that. But and of course, you get teased relentlessly until you leave the command and go somewhere else, because that's just how it is. So that was my best sea story. Any questions? Yes.
Hang on a minute till I get the microphone over there. The reason we use the microphone when you ask questions is it comes up on the video much clearer. Oh, way in the back.
You mentioned 18-hour days. Did the sailors' circadian rhythms actually become 18 hours? So you'd get up and go to sleep, et cetera, on an 18-hour rhythm?
It seemed to. I mean, somehow our bodies adjusted to it. It seems like it's hardwired biologically, but I don't know. I mean, when you're working and drinking coffee and you're so exhausted, of course, you can sleep anywhere, anytime. But when I got qualified and I had lots of free time to read and watch movies and stuff, I still was able to sleep. So
would you have breakfast, lunch, and dinner on a sort of 18-hour schedule?
Yes.
Go to the toilet on an 18-hour schedule?
Yeah. Shower.
Okay.
Go to your shifts.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for coming today. You had presented that this sub was decommissioned and it was a nuclear sub. What happens? Do you know what happens to the fuel and the reactor on a decommissioning?
After 30 years, I'm sure it's spent, and they probably put it in some salt mine in Arizona or something, you know, just to let it decay over tens of thousands of years. Just like but I'm not 100% sure. I mean, I'm sure what's recycled is recycled, and then of course the steel can be used for whatever, you know, but I'm not exactly sure. We used to joke in the Navy, oh yeah, my old submarine is now razor blades. So that was a joke we always had in the Navy, but I'm not 100% sure what happens to it. Yeah.
Thank you for your speech, Joe. Very interesting, being an ex-submariner myself in the Royal Navy.
Yeah.
But we were on pig boats from the Second World War.
Oh my.
They're called diesel generators,
Yep.
as you know, electric. And basically, we hadn't got the facilities you had. The toilet bit made me laugh because everybody had to go through that under pressure. The problem was they used to sometimes tell you the wrong valve. And they did it deliberately because everybody had to go through it. But shower facilities, I couldn't believe it. We had a small bowl of water that was our daily ration. So that's why they were called pig boats, because you didn't wash your clothes, you hardly washed yourself, and if by the time you got to the next port, you can imagine the revolting smell. But you didn't touch on the actual luxuries that you have and the space you had. We had spaces wherever you could get, and that was it. And it was a 4-hour, 4-on, you know, not the facilities you're 6 on, 6 off, you know. And I was volunteered by the Royal Navy because I got a diesel generator, petty officer, and the chief came down and then he sung on and said, "Pack your bags, you're on that submarine at 4 o'clock in the morning." I said, I know nothing about subs. And he said, "Well, you better get down there and have a look." And then I spent 6 months on a sub, and was I glad to get out of it in Singapore. I'd have enough. So looking at you, the amount of time you were in, I have great respect for that. 72 days.
Yes,
wow. I don't know. Just to send you around the twist, but thank you for that insight into your subs.
Welcome.
Two questions. The first one is, I used to work with a chap who was in the British Navy. He was a submariner, and he was 5'2", and he was in submarines in the Second World War, and he maintained that they always chose shorter people in the submarines. Is that true?
It wasn't true during my time in. We had a radio man. He was 6'2", if I remember correctly, and on a submarine that's like really tall, and we called him Tiny. He was a big man. And he had to, duck to go through the hatches.
Right, thank you.
I mean, but he managed.
And my second question is, what medical staff did you have on board?
Okay. So we called him Doc, but he was not a true medical doctor. He was what we call corpsmen, or the medical trained enlisted folks in the Navy. Think of like nurses, kind of like along with the same line. They have a training. And this corpsman, to serve as a lone corpsman, the one medical person, you had to go through advanced training. Like, think of like an advanced practice nurse would be today, like a nurse practitioner or something along those lines. We had one of those folks on board, one of those men on board, and he did all the medical care. And if he said, "Oh, I think it's appendicitis, I can't do that," obviously on a submarine, then the captain would have to make a decision and probably medevac with a helicopter, but that's up to the captain, because its mission is ruined and everything, and then they got to send somebody else out because then they know where you are. So it never happened for me. There were injuries, of course. People would be running and smack their head, and I witnessed that one time, and that that hurts like hell. But you don't do that twice, and you bust your shin going, not lifting your leg up far enough because of the oval hatch. Those were the most common injuries. But yeah, we just had an advanced practice nurse, basically.
Thank you, Joe. Excellent. Both had lots of memories. Not being on a submarine, but I used to work for Vickers Shipbuilding as a design engineer, and we had a full-size wooden model to play on. And yes, I've been in the reactor room.
Oh, okay.
Question for this. I suffer from claustrophobia, so I joined the Merchant Navy, so I was surface bound. But did you ever find anybody in the crew that ever suffered from claustrophobia while you were on duty?
So remember I told you they go to submarine school first, right out of basic training boot camp, And they screen you for that there, so they can get rid of you quickly if you have claustrophobia and you're not going to be able to complete the mission. No reason spending all that time and money on you to have you not be able to do your job. So they ask us, they send us to psychologists and, you know, ask you questions about all the standard battery of psychological tests to make sure you're stable enough. And somehow I passed.
It's a very good talk, yeah. I was wondering how you kind of adjust yourself to day and night. You don't have any more day or night. It's just continuous, yeah? And what was the food like?
Okay, the first question. They actually turned the lights off at night for 6 hours. It was on for 12, off for 6. So it was an artificial sun, I guess you could say. That's how we kind of knew just by looking whether it was nighttime or daytime. The food, mostly, they lied to me. The recruiter told me we were going to have steak and lobster, and, you know, that was bullshit. On Thanksgiving or Christmas Day, sometimes they would go out and get a nice, you know, candied ham or something. That was nice, but it was like rarity. Mostly it was just run-of-the-mill military food. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. Did you ever come across or hear of any other subs actually hitting a whale, or are there enough whales out there that you would that there was a chance that you could hit one?
I don't recall. I do remember one. Daniel Boone, if I remember correctly, hit an underwater mountain and caused significant damage to, of course, all the electronics and the front of the hull, and had to go in the shipyard for a long time to be repaired. I don't recall any of them ever hitting a whale, though. Never heard of that. Yeah, I can see surface ships, you know, possibly doing that, but I never heard of that. Yeah.
Question on a different angle. You were 17, 18 when you first recruited or joined the Navy.
Yes, sir.
So how long were you in the Navy or on the submarine?
So I was in the Navy for almost 8 years. And then I went to basic training, submarine school, A&C school, and then the submarine. So a tour in the submarine was normally 4 years, but I did what's called a split tour. I went to a submarine tender ship, a big surface ship that supplied the submarine. So I did 2 years in the submarine, 2 years in the tender ship, and that counted as my 4 years of sea duty. But most people spent 4 years on the submarine. So I did 2, and in that 2 years I did 4 patrols, 72 to 74 days. Underwater, each one.
So by that time you're in second half of your 20s in age?
Yes.
Where my thinking is what about life and relationships? I'm not talking about you personally, but as a general thing for submariners, they're, like you said, they're doing those sort of tours of duty. Girlfriend, spouse, fiance, whatever, there, wherever they are. Tell me a bit about that.
About like, well, like, are you talking about like, you know, your eyes and your brain when you have depth perception, when you're only looking like short distances for 72 days? When you get back up there, driving is interesting because you're looking off and basically to the horizon, and you haven't done that for 72 days. So your brain and your eyes are just not acclimated to that. So you have to, they warned us, be careful. Be very careful driving, and you're going to be spatially disoriented a little bit with larger distances because you don't have that on a submarine, of course. Yeah, what else? The as far as physically, that's the biggest one I remember, is just the spatial disorientation of the distance. It took you a day or two for your brain to readjust to normal spatial interpretation. Yeah. Relationships? There were a lot of divorces. It's a hard life. I used to say the hardest job in the Navy is a Navy spouse. And, you know, because usually the man of the house was gone, and you had to raise the kids, and some women couldn't handle it. And, yeah, you'd hear stories that you will come back, and then they're gone, everything's gone, their house, their apartment. They moved out while they were gone. It happened. And then on the other flip side, sometimes when you go to ports, the married guys would do it too. So it happened on both sides. It happened on both sides. I saw it. Yeah, but yeah, it's a hard life. Military life's a hard life, especially for relationships.
So, Joseph, after your naval career, you went into the Army, is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us why you made that transition, what you were thinking?
So, I remember I told you when I grew up, I didn't want to go to school. I was like burned out. I did not want to go to school. Well, after working really hard for 4 years, I said, okay, maybe college is not such a bad idea. So I started going to night school in the Navy because they paid for it, and I got like 2 years, basically a 4-year degree done, and then I went full-time after I got out of the Navy using the GI Bill to get my bachelor's in medical technology because I wanted to do something different. So I became a medical technologist, which lab tech, if a lot of you guys know, is a common term, and I had no intention of ever go back in the military at all, ever. And but then life took me at 38 years old. I decided, you know what? I'm just having a midlife crisis, and I don't have the money for a big fancy red sports car, so I'm going to join the Army. So I did. I joined the Army. This time I was an officer, though, and so that was better pay and better life. I did about 12 years in the Army and got for a total of 20 years federal military service, and was able to retire. And but yeah, I was a clinical laboratory officer in the Army. So.
Any other questions?
Never. That's really the limiting factor, is because the nuclear plant could go for years and years and years and years, and we had the ability to recycle the atmosphere and create oxygen. So really the limiting factor was food. And yeah, most of it was gone after 74 days. But we would stack it in the bilge is the bottom part of the ship below the deck, and we would stack it, they would everywhere, every nook and cranny, food and cans and eggs and I don't remember ever having lobster. I wasn't in the Air Force, I was in the Navy.
Yeah, hello, me again. You briefly touched on claustrophobia. I, as a petty officer, I never slept on watch on surface ships. Mm-hmm. But on the submarines, because of the sleeping pattern and working in between two massive Gardner diesels, the hum is so, but we didn't have any heat defenders, sort of soft idea. And by the time I got to Singapore, I was on 4 charges of sleeping on watch. Now, that is a major issue in the Royal Navy. And I stood to lose my rank and go to 1 month in DQs in Singapore, Changi, which is not very pleasant. Anyhow, so when I got there, lucky for me, the skipper was an old skipper, sent me to the medical officer, and between the medical officer and the commander sub-pack in Singapore, they worked out that I'd got this problem with sleeping, and I got off it, and thank God I got back into surface ships. So listening to this conversation is quite interesting, and thank you for relating it all to us.
Yeah, sleeping was not allowed, and there was, I remember we weren't even out at sea, and we were, we call it refit. It's when the oncoming crew for 30 days has to, we should have long days. Basically, you go there before the sun comes up and you leave when the sun's down. Long, long, long days of working, and sometimes up to like 30 hours, and I remember being exhausted. And somebody fell asleep, and basically the stern warning was sent out by the captain of the submarine, and then a first-class petty officer, an E6, a nuclear engineer, fell asleep, and he was busted down to E5. And the nuclear engineers particularly worked hard, and we were all of us were like, that's just not fair, because they were working 30, 40 hours and not expecting him to doze off briefly. It's like way above my pay grade. So.
Well, that was a really amazing talk, Joseph. I can add. I can add one story. When I was graduating from high school, the naval recruiter came to our school, and he pointed me out. He goes, "Hey, I got a job for you." And I go, "Well, I'm kind of claustrophobic. What would I possibly do?" And he goes, "Well, since you're so tall, I'm going to put you on the submarine. You're going to be a periscope." Luckily, I didn't. Anyway, amazing talk today, and then a show of appreciation, we'd like to present you with a certificate. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Great talk. All right. Daryl, are you in the back? You have anything for our... no, nothing. All right. So that means we can bounce right into open